I'm Mark Seifter, and this is Arcane Mark. Welcome to Arcane Mark Ask Mark Grab Bag, where we're going to answer all the questions that I've gathered up into a grab bag that are shorter and don't have a whole episode based around a complicated explanation of that question. And we'll also answer all of your questions from the chat, so make sure to keep asking them. Alright, let's get started. I'm going to start with Tyrant Totem. Tyrant Totem question is really easy to answer. So we'll answer it pretty quickly. Tyrant Totem. How much damage does the Swallow Hole from Greater Tyrant Totem deal to a creature trapped inside the Barbarian? The answer, or my answer anyway, as always, these are my personal answers. They're not official answers. I'm just doing my own answers on this stream. The answer, swallowed creatures take 1d6 points of bludgeoning damage plus the Barbarian strength modifier each round for a medium Barbarian, 1d4 for a small Barbarian, and so on. There we go. Not too bad. Alright, energized wild shape. Do you choose the energy form when you assume a wild shape or when you take the feat? You choose when you take the feat, as the special section indicates. Alright. Next question. Sylvan Trickster. Does the Sylvan Trickster count its rogue level as its effective witch level for the purpose of determining the effects of hexes? So this is an interesting one. It doesn't say that it does in the book. And arguably the Sylvan Trickster is an unfairly powerful trade-off, but that's no reason for people to try to not let it count its rogue level as its effective witch level, because otherwise the DC on everything is terrible, and there's only a few hexes you can effectively use, so we might as well say yes. But with an asterisk, be careful about the Sylvan Trickster. But hey, there are other archetypes that are as much of an imbalanced trade-off. We will talk about them when we get into design tools, archetypes, at some point on one of the Tuesdays. Alright, let's look at the next one. Exotic Heritage. The feat lets me choose a wall-blooded bloodline with Eldritch Heritage, but it doesn't say what to do if that bloodline is supposed to trade out something I can't trade out, like Bloodline Arcana. Can I still gain a bloodline power if I don't have something I need to trade, such as the Sylvan bloodline? No. You can only take a wall-blooded bloodline where the powers are clean 1-for-1 trades for the original bloodline's powers. Since the Sylvan ability trades out both an Arcana and a power, you cannot take the Sylvan bloodline with Exotic Heritage. Alright, next, Rot Warden. The archetype mentions Vermin Shape 3, but there is no such spell in the game. How should I handle turning into a huge vermin? It should work as a Vermin Shape 2, except for that you wind up with plus 6 strength, minus 4 dexterity, and plus 6 natural armor. Alright, next one, Forester Hunter. When does a Forester gain her first favored terrain? It says at 5th level, but implies it comes before that. Answer. Forester gains her first favored terrain at 1st level and every 4 levels thereafter. Alright. So we've got a good number of answers so far. Let's look at the chat. Alright, it seems like nobody has any questions of your own at the moment. I will continue on with some more from this list of grab bag questions. Next, Seasoned Witch. The archetype calls the hex it gains at 1st level a bonus hex, but implies that it is a replacement for the 1st level hex. As it says, it alters the 1st level hex. Bonus usually means on top of everything else, which is correct. It should say it replaces the 1st level hex, and it should lose that word bonus. Who knows where that came from? So that is the answer for Seasoned Witch. Alright, next. Fiend Flesh Shifter. This archetype is pretty evil and unnatural with evil alignment restrictions. Is it really supposed to keep the Druidic Code of Conduct? No. Fiend Flesh Shifter doesn't learn Druidic, doesn't lose powers if she doesn't revere nature. She still needs to meet her evil alignment requirement, or she takes the effects listed in the X Shifters section. Alright, so that's Fiend Flesh Shifter. Green Knight. The Green Knight's Walled Empathy flat out uses the Green Knight's Diplomacy modifier instead of a Walled Empathy modifier of level plus Charisma modifier. So why does it matter that it also uses her Cavalier level as an effective Druid level? It doesn't say to do this in the archetype, but should I add them together or something? Answer: no, you don't add them together. Including an effective Druid level would allow you to qualify for an effect that required Wild Empathy and a particular Druid level, for example. Next, Water Dancer Monk. The Water Dancer changes all its Monk abilities from Wisdom to Charisma, but then also has a dodge bonus per level up to his Charisma bonus, which seems like they would stack. Is that correct? The dodge bonus, as well as replacing the bonus feats, are artifacts of an older Wisdom Charisma hybrid version of the Water Dancer that somehow got added back in later in the process. Remove the line, when unarmored and unencumbered, a Water Dancer adds 1 point of Charisma bonus per monk level to his armor class as a dodge bonus. If he is caught flat-footed or otherwise denied his dexterity bonus, he also loses this bonus. And this replaces the bonus feat the monk normally gains at first level with this alters the monk's key ability score. Alright. Bully Animal Companion Archetype. When the Bully Companion Archetype ignores combat expertise as a prerequisite, can it also ignore Intelligence 13 as a prerequisite? Answer: yes, it can. Alright. There's a comedy question with no answer needed. How do you calculate damage increases or decreases for size changes? Well, that is a good comedy question. Basically, the way that you calculate it is pretty complicated. There is a large number of random things that all were in different charts that somehow we worked together and we found a way, based on some people on the forums working together with me, to integrate all of those different charts in a way that actually works out. And it is, let's see if I can find it. Here we go. It is right here. Size changes, effective size changes, and damage dice progression. I'm confused by how to increase and decrease manufactured and natural weapon damage dice when the weapon size or effective size changes. There's a bunch of different charts. I'm not sure which to use. When the damage dealt by a creature's weapons or natural attacks changes due to a change in size or the size of a weapon, use the following rules to determine the change. And then there's an FAQ that has a giant chart that goes from 1 up to 16d6. And basically, you either go up or down by either 1 step or 2 step, and the way to figure out whether you go up by 1 step or 2 steps is based on how large you were to begin with. And somehow that chart managed to combine all of the charts that were there before and make all of them work together. So basically, that is the answer to that question. Okay. Next question. And now we have some that are not from Ultimate Wilderness, but there were a lot of FAQ questions from Ultimate Wilderness that did not get answered. Maul of the Titans at Greater Sunder. If I sunder an object with Greater Sunder using a Maul of the Titans for triple damage, what happens to the wielder? Because if you'll remember, Greater Sunder applies the remaining damage to the wielder. Since the wielder is not an inanimate object, you should divide the remaining damage by 3 before applying it, since Maul of the Titans tripled the damage to the inanimate object. Alright, looks like Linda has linked the FAQ with the size changes. That was the most fact of all time, the size changes fact. And it has now been answered. The currently most fact, in case anyone has checked out the XP rewards and looked at the one where you can ask a question, but some questions will not be answered, and then it gives, for example, that Bard question. That Bard question is currently the most asked question. So since we're doing a grab bag round, I might as well mention here what I've already said on the forums about why that Bard question is really impossible to answer without spending many hours chronicling stuff. So if you're not aware what that Bard question is, it's the question about all sorts of new performances. Many of them are bardic masterpieces. Some of them are performances that are in different archetypes that switch out for the bard's performances. And whether or not all of them count as performances, and whether or not new abilities for the bard are taking into account all the possible performances. There's abilities out there that say it works for any bardic performance, but really seem like they're expecting it to be something you activate with a standard move or swift action on a round-by-round basis. And basically the answer there comes down to the bard was not really future-proof very well in the core rulebook. It worked fine with all the performances it had there, but the moment those masterpieces and other performances got added, there were a bunch of smaller, trickier little aspects that weren't really taken into account in the initial bard. Because the simple answer to the bard question is that as they were written, as they were meant to be, the masterpieces are definitely performances. However, certainly some of the masterpieces that have been created, especially ones after Ultimate Magic, have sometimes been created and gone to print and absolutely can't be counted as normal performances, or else their entire purpose doesn't work. I'm thinking of ones particularly like Arrow Song's Lament, that where you have to do it during your daily preparations at the start of the day. So if it was a performance, all sorts of weird stuff would happen. So the answer is basically they are performances, but some of them are need to count as not being performances, and they need to be done on a case-by-case basis throughout every performance and masterpiece that's ever been written. That will take a long time. Alright, let's get back to ones we can answer. How about ranged feint? The normal clause in ranged feint seems to say I need to be in melee to perform the bluff check part of a feint. Is that really true for a normal feint? No. The normal clause means you normally have to be in melee to make the attack part of the feint, not the bluff check. Alright. So far, so good. Let's get into two that are a little bit more complicated, but they're still not too bad. Here's one that we mentioned in the first Simulacrum FAQ, but we didn't really dig into in big detail. Wishing to duplicate spells with Wish and Limited Wish. If I want to wish for a Sorcerer Wizard spell effect, can I use another class's spell list that has early access to duplicate an effect that would normally be too high level for my Wish or Limited Wish? What happens if I duplicate a spell with a particularly long casting time, but my Wish spell says it's a standard action? Now this is a tricky one. You guys remember back in Simulacrum where we talked about Wish and Limited Wish just a bit? And we said that it's very important to remember the clause of Wish, the most important clause of Wish, about effects whose power level is in line with the above effects. You need to think about whether or not what you're doing is in line with the effect of a normal wizard spell that is of the appropriate level. And in many of these cases, the effect is definitely not in line with a spell of that level. So, for example, if you are using an early access spell that, say, is a 5th level spell for a 6th level spellcaster that's an 8th level spell for wizards, that for Unlimited Wish, you are casting a spell that is actually higher level than Limited Wish with Limited Wish. It's definitely not in line with the effects of a 6th level wizard spell. Similarly, if you were going to cast a spell with a really long casting time with a Wish or a Limited Wish, you'd have to ask yourself whether or not the long casting time changing into a standard action fundamentally changes the spell into something that's not in line with the same power level. For example, one thing that is often talked about in this scenario is the Geas spell. The Geas spell is a spell that, because it has a long casting time, it basically means you need a helpless or tied up target to have them stay with you for long enough that you can use the effect on them. However, and therefore, with its super long casting time, it has no saving throw. I mean, you already have this person at your mercy. If you were to duplicate it as a standard action, that is not at the same level of... is not in line with the above effects, because now you win automatically against anybody. So adding a will save like Lesser Geas, which has a 1 round casting time, is a good way to handle keeping the effect in line. In general, another way to do something with a longer duration effect is to have the wishing spell take a standard action for the caster, then have the effect take place over a longer period of time corresponding to the spell's usual casting time. Essentially, the wishing spell takes care of the longer casting for you, but it still takes a long time. That's another way to handle it too. When you're trying to figure out which spells to allow in there, in terms of early access spells, I would strongly recommend disallowing the duplication of, for instance, a super high level cleric or druid spell that happens to be 5th level or lower on a 6 or 4 level caster's list. There's also one other thing that's interesting, which is a really bizarre thing about going after an early access spell. If the spell's on the sorcerer wizard spell list, you can only emulate it with a wish spell if the sorcerer wizard level is low enough, regardless of the other lists, because it says if the spell's on the sorcerer wizard spell list, yada yada, you can cast it at a certain level. If not, then you can cast it if it's this other level. So, weirdly, being on the sorcerer wizard spell list would actually, no matter what you're doing, it limits you away from casting it. So, for example, you couldn't use something off the summoner spell list that was lower level than the wizard spell list, but if it was only on the summoner spell list, you're in limbo, and you have to decide, and my suggestion is do not use early access casters to figure out what is in line with those effects. Because early access casters, let me tell you, having designed some of them, they get their stuff at way lower spell level, and that's just because their spells come super late. There's a kind of tricky thing in Pathfinder First Edition that I think is very confusing, especially to new players, about what the actual power level of the spells are, because, for instance, some 4-level spellcasters, their 4th level spells are ridiculously powerful because you know that they're only going to get those spells at level 13. And that they're not going to get very many of them per day. Alright, let's see. What's the next one? Oh yes, this one has just gone back and forth a million times. Brass knuckles, cestises, spike gauntlets, and other punching weapons. How do these weapons work? Are they unarmed strikes? Well, brass knuckles, cestises, spike gauntlets, and all other weapons listed as light weapons are all their own weapons. And despite being used for punching, none of them have connection to unarmed strikes. Except, I didn't say this in the list before, gauntlets are just flat out listed as being unarmed attacks, and specifically, their effect is you make your unarmed strikes and they count as lethal. They're not listed like as a weapon, they're listed as an unarmed attack that makes your unarmed strikes count as lethal. When used in this fashion, which is the fashion that was in the core rulebook, they don't provide any other benefits to the unarmed strike, and therefore they wouldn't be enhanced in any way that would provide additional benefits. However, clearly, just like the Bardic question from before, certain rules have come out later on that did not treat them in that fashion. So you might want to consider allowing gauntlets to be used in a second mode as a separate weapon like spiked gauntlets. If you did that, it would be a distinct option from using gauntlets to make unarmed strikes lethal. It would be using them as a weapon. It would count as a different weapon. It would have its own weapon focus. It would not be weapon focused on unarmed strike. Wouldn't apply any special benefits you have with your unarmed strikes. If you did that, then it would be possible to enhance the gauntlets as weapons, but those enhancements would apply to the attacks made with the gauntlet as weapons. This is mostly a crib to try to allow you to use rules that, for whatever reason, accidentally treated the gauntlets as weapons, even though, as they were listed, they just make your unarmed strikes count as lethal. So, if any of you can think of any potential issues that would happen with having that second gauntlet mode, then I'd love to hear it. It's just a spitball of mine that would help make some of the other rules work together. And that's something that, figuring out about that is one reason why that gauntlet fact from a really long time ago had a little trouble taking off from the ground level. So, okay, that's a grab bag of a bunch of different FAQ possibility questions from the Paizo forums, but I also said that we were going to cover death effects and regeneration. Death effects and regeneration is the most asked small topic. The Bard question is the most asked topic overall that has not been answered by any FAQs up till this point. So what is that question? The question essentially comes down to this. If I throw a death effect at a creature with regeneration, what do I do? Regeneration says it can't die until the regeneration has been suppressed. Death effects say it instantly dies automatically. So we're talking about an unstoppable force versus an immovable rock. What's the right answer in that situation? Well, people have loved to debate that, an unstoppable force versus an immovable object, for a long time. In this case, one of the reasons why it would be a tricky FAQ is that the answer is probably going to be, or should be, it depends. And by it depends, I mean, it depends on which one feels like it should be more unstoppable or immovable in that particular case of that particular regeneration. And the way I like to think of it is trolls are usually used as the example. And trolls should probably just die when you hit them with the death effect. Because trolls are a lower level monster, their regeneration is just fire and acid, and the way I like to do the litmus test is, which one does it feel really cheap that the other one is beating? So it would feel really cheap if a troll's regeneration just defeated a really high level death spell for this low level monster. That doesn't make any sense. But let's go around to the other side. Let's say you have a behemoth. They have unsuppressible regeneration. They're super high level. They're supposed to be, you can't really defeat them. Or the Tarrasque or something else was really hard to defeat regeneration. And suppose that you got a death effect off on that creature, it wasn't immune, or somehow you managed it. In that case, their regeneration should protect them because it feels cheap for a piddling death effect that even much lower spellcasters could have to kill a creature that's supposed to have a regeneration that you can't get through. So I would say look at the regeneration, look at how hard that regeneration seems to be to bypass, maybe how badass the creature is, and that's how you decide whether or not the regeneration is, or the death effect is the winner in our unstoppable force versus immovable object. Alright, that is my answer for that. It looks like we have another comedy question from Chaotic Cordran. If my GM is watching, how do I get Gints on the Kingmaker campaign without my character accidentally permanently dying? Hints. Alright, so, when you say hints on the Kingmaker campaign, do you mean that you are looking for hints about the plot of the Kingmaker campaign, or hints on what to do next on the Kingmaker campaign? That's a question I'm not sure I understand, but it might be a good idea if you are in a situation where you need more hints, that you gather information, use some divinations. You can go back to the divination episode that we had a few weeks ago. It's still on Twitch barely, I think. It's about to go down, and I'm going to put it up on YouTube. So I think that's the one that's about to expire today. So if you check out the divination episode, you should be able to figure out some hints, and you'll work together with your GM so your character won't accidentally permanently die. It'll be a great situation for everybody. Alright, so are there any more questions out there, everybody? This grab bag, we answered a ton of questions, and we certainly went through them very quickly compared to our usual topics, which are ridiculously long and complicated. That's because sometimes questions have a simple answer. They might not be the definitive answer, and it might take a long time if we were all discussing all these answers out, like we might do in an FAQ meeting. but they are simple to express what the answer is. So, let's see. Anybody else got one you want to have answered? That's mostly my grab bag list here. If not, we're going to move on to the questions from... it looks like we've got one here from Clencero. Alright, sure. And if you're retyping it, I'll move on to some of the questions from the thread. Let me see what we've got here, because I don't have any more from other sources, but I do have some from the thread. Here we go. There is a question about Minor Ring of Inner Fortitude. Does this prevent ability damage and drain from each hit or overall total? It prevents it from each hit. It is friggin' strong against ability drain and damage. It's also pretty expensive. Alright. Let's see. Here's another question. Question is, you answered my question before, however I wrote it very badly. It was the question about, it was the question about moving in a straight line, or, no, it was a question of can you jump over obstacles or difficult terrain. But it was supposed to be, can you jump over obstacles or difficult terrain when charging? But charging was not mentioned before. Alright, well, talking about a straight line, I have clearly moved towards it. The charge has to be in a straight line. Now, is it possible you can charge in a straight line and be in the air for some of that time? Sure, that's possible. You can probably charge and be in the air for some of the time. However, and be in a straight line. However, you definitely can't be in a straight line if you're trying to also go up and over the difficult terrain that's on the ground, unless the thing you're charging at is in the air. So, it really depends on what the line is to the creature that you're charging at, but in many cases you can't. And that is why, as mentioned in the question on the forums, there are abilities that let you make acrobatics checks and jump around while charging. It's because normally you have to be in a straight line, so you're pretty limited. Alright, we have one from Sheppy T.S. Rodriguez. Do Blade Barrier deals damage per hit if I full attack with 4 attacks? Do I have to make 4 reflex saves? Alright. So, let's check it out. In Blade Barrier. Here we go. Blade Barrier says, an immobile vertical curtain of whirling blades springs into existence. Any creature passing through the wall takes a certain amount of damage. If you evoke the barrier so it appears where creatures are, each creature takes damage as if passing through the wall. Each such creature can avoid the wall, ending up on the side of its choice, and thus take no damage by making a successful reflex save. A Blade Barrier provides cover against attacks made through it. Alright. Well, technically, the wall, the Blade Barrier does not actually say that it damages you if you make attacks through it. It only damages you if you pass through it, or if it is evoked so that you appear in it. Now, is it reasonable to decide that you want to roll that a creature, like sticking its arm through it with reach, might take some damage? Sure. That is a reasonable ruling to make, potentially, but it's not how the spell normally works. It's not like a fire shield where every time you hit someone you take damage. So you'd have to come up with that on the fly. And the questions of if I full attack with 4 attacks, do I make 4 reflex saves? Well, technically you don't have to make any. So you would, your group would have to decide, does that make any sense that I can stick my arm in there 4 times and not take any damage? Maybe not. Maybe you would decide that's a total of 1 reflex save, perhaps, for the full attack. That's really up to you to decide how many reflex saves you're going to require, if you are going to require them. This spell doesn't have any in there. Looks like Kansera's question was already the one that was answered from the forums, since Kansera is Wraith Strike. And Statler97 says, I would think jumping would stop your charge momentum when you land. Well, certainly when you land from a jump, you're going to lose a whole lot of momentum. Generally, if you're charging and jumping in a straight line, you probably are going after something in the air or from the air, sort of swooping down. And so, yeah, you probably wouldn't wind up landing, or maybe there's a case where you like fling yourself bodily forward in a straight line over a cliff and into the creature. So, as long as you can stay completely in a straight line, as far as I can see in the charge rules, you're going to be okay. But you usually can't. And so that is potentially an issue. It would be less of an issue if it weren't for the fact that full attacks were so the way they are in Pathfinder First Edition, and that therefore everybody and their mother wants to be pouncing and therefore needs to be charging. Alright, let's see what we've got for other questions. And you guys can keep asking them too, but I do have a source of some other questions in here. Oh, looks like someone asked about Greater Tyrant Totem. They got their question answered. And we have a comment, that's why we play Unchained, from Chef BTS Rodriguez. Well, we sure do like that action economy from Unchained. In fact, by the time we put it in Unchained, we kind of knew that's what we wanted to move towards for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And so it was sort of an action system that Steven worked on a lot, Jason worked on a little bit, and together they worked on that action system, and we put it out as an Unchained action system, and let me tell you, it's a great action system. It doesn't work perfectly for Pathfinder First Edition, because Pathfinder First Edition just has so many things that are built assuming the whole, you could take a standard action and a move action plus a swift action, unless you took an immediate action since last round, and also any number of free actions, but you could be limited by the GM, and you can replace the standard and move with a full round action if you want, and also a 5-foot step, but only if you didn't move. And also speaking is not an action, and there are other things that are not an action that you can always do, or you can spend all of your time doing this turn and until the next turn, which is a full round, which is not a full round action system of Pathfinder First Edition. That system really has been built into so many of the classes and abilities that a lot of things you have to tinker with or house rule. And some people on the forums were finding some good ways to do that. Unchained, unfortunately, did not have enough space. There were so many things we were thinking, oh, we could put this and that, and we looked and no, there's not enough. We can put a few of the top ways that you would change things, and that's about it. But definitely the Unchained system is pretty popular in Pathfinder 2nd Edition because we built it from the ground up to work really well with that system. Alright, so we have some follow-up questions on grappling. The grapple condition gives you a -4 penalty to dexterity and a -2 on attack rolls and combat maneuver checks, except those made to grapple or escape a grapple. Does that mean when a creature is trying to break or maintain a grapple, they roll with no penalty, and the grappler's CMD is -2 because of the dex penalty, making it slightly easier to break or maintain the grapple? So, that is true, because of the fact that you don't take that penalty, because otherwise the AC penalty cancels out the attack roll penalty. Keep in mind, if you're using some kind of weapon, or not weapon finesse, agile maneuvers or something, and you're using your dexterity, that's not true. And then, in fact, you're in big trouble, because the -2 to hit stacks with the -2 from dex for weapon finesse or using your dexterity, and you're behind by 2 or equal if you're going up against the same dex. Alright, Chef BTS Rodriguez says, a 600-page Unchained book. That would have been awesome. Well, how about a 640-page Unchained book, Chef BTS Rodriguez? It's called Pathfinder 2nd Edition Core Rulebook. Who said we can't give you more than you asked for when you asked for an absolutely ridiculously large book? Statler97 says, I'm looking forward to 2nd Edition more and more as it gets closer. Me too, Statler. I'm a little bit worried that a lot of people are going to be upset, but that is just because a lot of people are always going to be upset. People love Pathfinder First Edition. I love Pathfinder First Edition. And there is always very real grief when an edition changes. And a lot of people make light of the grief that other people feel when an edition changes, when something changes in their lives, when something's new. But it's actually pretty serious, and I don't think we should make fun of that. Alright, let's move on to the next question. It is also on grapple again. If a creature takes that minus 20 penalty to grab with part of their body, then they are not grappled. They're not in a grapple. Does that mean they can move without making a maintain check to move the grabbed creature? If so, can they move the creature with them without a roll? Can a creature with grab, a bite, and flight grab someone in their mouth at minus 20, fly off with them without a maintain check to move the target? Well, it says you're not in a grapple, and being in a grapple, or you don't have the grappled condition, sorry. And the grappled condition is what stops you from just moving whenever you want. So, seems to me that you can. Pretty cool. Chef BTS Rodriguez says, I'll buy that then. Sounds good to me. I would like it, just if everyone who is interested just checks it out. And if you like it, buy it. We're going to have the rules up on the Archives of Nethys right away, pretty much, so it should be good. Statler says, I've enjoyed first edition from the beginning, will gladly continue to play it, but I'm hoping to love second edition too. Keeps pies on making content for years to come. Well, our group definitely likes second edition, and I will be playing second edition War for the Crown in an hour after this stream is over. So, our group was definitely very, very hardcore first edition, by which I mean we just embrace the fact that you could do some pretty crazy things in Pathfinder First Edition. We banned, as a group, some things that were just too extreme, but we left in a lot of stuff that's way, way, way above baseline, and then we just buffed the crap out of APs and other adventures to make them strong enough to withstand that. So it was just a very high power level game. And it was funny because War for the Crown, converting War for the Crown to second edition takes me less time and prep to do than converting Jade Regent from Pathfinder First Edition to Pathfinder First Edition that has combats that were interesting for my group. So, definitely I'm pretty excited about how compatible it is, and pretty excited about the fact that my group can still do all the things that they love, but without being so far above the baseline that we have to completely change everything. Alright. Oh, Statler says, the Codex hardcovers are some of my favorites as a GM. Think we will see similar books for second edition. Well, I don't really know exactly what books we're going to see, and probably if I did know, I shouldn't tell you on this stream, but certainly I was a big fan of all of the codices. I know that more people overall were fans of especially the Monster Codex, but the Monster Codex, the Villain Codex style that had cohesive chapters as opposed to the cohesive chapters full of things you could use together with some extra rules, as opposed to the NPC Codex where the NPCs were sort of just there and they may or may not be what you want for that level. And so I would say if there are, maybe they're more likely to be like Monster Codex. That was a really good one. Everybody liked that. Also, technically the book with my first credit as a designer in it, even though it was almost completely done when I came on as a designer, all that was left was copy fitting, which of course I didn't do because you want the person who actually worked on it to copy fit it. Alright, and then Statler says that Statler would like to see the codices balance out against more bestiaries. Well, certainly the bestiaries are very popular. The fact that we made it all the way to Bestiary 6 and still had more things that people wanted in Bestiary, the bestiaries are popular too. I personally like a mix of bestiaries and codices, but it's more what you guys like in total that is going to drive it's going to drive books in general, and I do not have all the data that some other people at the company do about basically about which different books people like. All right, let's see. More questions. What bonuses to damage can you add when you maintain to damage? Can you add power attack if you took the penalty on the combat maneuver check? Can you add bonuses to unarmed strike damage? Can you add sneak attack if the target is pinned or flanked? Hidden strike? Alright, so in general, when you're talking about the rules for grappling and it says that you're damaging, it doesn't necessarily say what you do and do not add. It just says damage. You can inflict damage equal to your unarmed strike, a natural attack, or an attack mode with armor spikes, or a light or one-handed weapon. So I would assume that adds pretty much anything that was going to be on there. And certainly, I would say that since you took the power attack penalty on the grapple check, then you should be able to get the damage. Now, if you're getting damage automatically somehow, and it was not involving the penalty, then you probably shouldn't. But yeah, I would say you could probably add everything to that if it would apply. And one more, Don Bong gives +2 to grapple checks when wielding it, but doesn't say anything about removing the penalty for grappling without one free hand. Does that mean you take an effective penalty unless you have another ability that removes the penalty? Yes, I believe it does. Because it doesn't say anything about removing the penalty for grappling with one hand free. So that's about true. Alright, Sheppy T.S. Rodriguez asks, would you say that the later APs are harder than earlier ones, or just better suited for experienced players? Well, Sheppy, my group has played a lot of different APs, but they're sort of scattershot throughout the life cycle of Pathfinder, and I wouldn't even necessarily say that the later APs are harder or better suited for experienced players. I think it really depends on the AP and depends on the very specific stuff that's in the AP. For instance, like some of the 3-5 Rise of the Runelords adventures, like say the famous boss of Part 2 in 3-5, was one of the few times that you have a monster or an enemy that is basically allowed to use all of the rules of PF1 that they would have access to get a lot of AC and other stats like PCs do. And it kind of wiped a lot of parties out. It was too hard for most groups. So later stuff is more likely to sort of self-nerf a creature like that so that it can't get numbers that are far beyond the bestiary expectation numbers, which, as you probably know if you've looked at them, PCs blow out of the water by like an omega amount. So in that way, that 3-5 adventure was actually harder than any of the later stuff on that encounter. But in other ways, certainly later encounters at least have more, later adventure paths have more options available. And this is something that I like to talk about sometimes in terms of designing new rules, but I'll talk about it here because it does matter. So, if you're familiar with cane toads in Australia, they were brought over, they had no natural predator, there's nothing around except for those cane toads, and they have expanded drastically as an invasive species because of the fact that there's no ecological niche, they just do whatever they want. Sometimes it is true that PCs with new abilities are cane toads in earlier adventures, but that's not to say that newer adventures always have the safeguards in them that they could. And sometimes new abilities that seem innocuous are actually cane toads in disguise. I remember one time there was, and let me make sure I get this right, there was an adventure with, I want to say, a ring of mind shielding. So let me check that out to make sure that is right. Yes. So there was an adventure with a ring of mind shielding. That makes you immune to detect thoughts, discern lies, and any attempt to discern your alignment. And there was totally a demon, and the demon had that on. And the idea was, well, the demon is not going to get caught, which would ruin the entire adventure. And it probably wouldn't. in the core rules, the Ring of Mind Shielding does a great job. It's better than putting up a misdirection or a non-detection where someone could make a saving throw or a caster level check. It renders you immune. However, there's a spell called Detect Demons that is in like the Demon Slayer's Handbook. And it is not detecting your alignment or your thoughts or any of the other things in the Ring of Mind Shielding. And so it's a cane toad in this situation because nobody was thinking, oh, right, we should have one in here that also detects your. Ring of Mind Shielding could have said it protects you against spells that detect your creature type, or that detect your creature type if that would give away your alignment or something like that, but it didn't. And similarly, later APs are more likely to be able to have safeguards in for newer content, but that doesn't mean they do. They might. And I really love some of the newer APs. I really love some of the older APs. War for the Crown, my group is really enjoying a lot. So it really depends on the situation, and I wouldn't say that overall, but I am not, and I've not played everything, so I don't really have a good body of work to do an empirical comparison. It's more like a few data points that I'm comparing against. Alright, so let's see if we have another question here. Question about scatter firearms. Excuse me. It says feats like Vital Strike cannot add damage to scatter firearms. Can other feats like Deadly Aim add damage? Or is it more that no feats can add damage? So let's take a look at scatter firearms and Vital Strike and all that jazz in the firearm description. Here's what it says. It indeed says each attack roll takes a -2 penalty, and its attack damage cannot be modified by precision damage or damage increasing feats such as Vital Strike. So, the question asks, can Power Attack be added? Well, Deadly Aim be added? Well, that is a damage increasing feat, so it would not be added. Damage increasing feats such as Vital Strike. The main point is damage increasing feats. It's very important. Sometimes rules give an example. Sometimes rules specify what the normal would be. Or sometimes, very particularly, sometimes rules will tell you something like what would normally happen in the situation. Or will even say something that's redundant. That doesn't necessarily mean that any other time that rule's not there, that you now need that to be written in every place. Here's an example. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, for some of the first level feats in particular, where we're thinking you might not know what the rules are, you're just checking out the first level feats for your class or you're new, we might tell you something like that your multiple attack penalty applies to each attack that you're making. That doesn't mean that if a feat doesn't say that your multiple attack penalty doesn't apply. It still always applies unless the feat says, hey, don't apply your multiple attack penalty. So it's very important to note that the use of examples and the use of reminder text does not imply that their absence or of reminder text or the absence of something as an example indicates that it's not true for that. Basically, the absence of Power Attack does not indicate that Power Attack is not included as a damage increasing feat in this question, and the absence of reminder about multiple attack penalty does not mean that suddenly you don't take the multiple attack penalty in Pathfinder 2nd Edition or the playtest. Alright, let's see. Do we have any more questions from the question threads? Okay, I think that's all the ones from that particular thread that people added on for additional questions. We actually got through all of them today, so it's a true grab bag. And it looks like any of you guys have some more questions for me. I'll give you guys a little bit of time to think about that. Otherwise, we can, once we finish the last questions, we'll say goodbye to YouTube. And then we will do a last few bits of figuring things out with the Twitchers. Alright. Yeah, it looks like well, here's one from Consero. I've tried to tell people about reminder text in PF1, but some people take an absence of reminder text as an absence of a rule. If possible, I'd like for this to get mentioned on the forums for 2nd edition. Well, I'm happy to mention it more, or I'm happy to mention it early and often. Um, I can't remember if we put it in to the core rulebook to specifically say in somewhere that sometimes there's reminder text. That doesn't mean that if you don't have that reminder text that the rule doesn't exist anymore. But I can't remember if we made that into the core rulebook or not, or if it was just something we wanted to tell people all the time. There are so many things going in and out of the core rulebook, and it's 640 pages that I just don't know anymore what's in there. I know what we thought of putting in there, and I know what we've got there sometimes, but I'm happy to mention it many times that if the book says that there's a rule, then that means that there's a rule. Linda says another related issue is exact phrasing. That's true. In Pathfinder First Edition, unfortunately, there were some times where two very similar phrasings actually meant something different. In 2nd edition, we want to be able to not have to use exact, extremely rigid phrasing when we're talking about certain situations. And so, if you're Linda says, if people see something written with slightly different words, does it mean something different? We want that to not be the case as long as we're using the same rules term as we were using before. And that's certainly why you may notice in Pathfinder playtest that not entirely, and we try to move more towards this for 2nd edition in general, but like the traits are usually more likely to be adjectives, and the actions are a little more likely to be verbs, and then you can use them in their verb form, and that means, like, since everyone's doing grapple, the grapple action, you could use it as a verb, and that means to use you don't have to say when you take the grapple action, you say when you grapple. When you are grappling with a capital G, and then that means that you are using the grapple action. So that would help, because they have them as parts of speech that you can just use in general. Or for instance, if a trait is an adjective, like let's say you may have seen we have the magical trait instead of the magic trait. So then you can say if it's a magical weapon, or if it's a magical creature or something like that, and you can just use it in plainer language but still have it be correct as a rules term. So we want people to be able to understand that, but we also want it to be easy to understand. In particular, you'll find that reminder text is much more common in lower level abilities, especially 1st level, and then we stop reminding you in higher level abilities, because by the time you really need to be looking at 16th level feats, you probably know what the multiple attack penalty is and when it applies, and we'll tell you if it doesn't apply. But at 1st level, who knows? You don't know when it's going to apply, so we're probably going to tell you if it does and if it doesn't, because it's a 1st level feat. And we're doing that really even more than in the playtest. Instead of the playtest had a lot of things that were added later on that were links to different pages in different places that had the rules to reference for you, but then you would feel like you were sent away from where you were actually going. It could derail your train of thought. So we brought the rule in when it was something you probably might need to figure out for a new player. That does mean that it has reminder text more, and it is something to consider. Alright. Let's see. It looks like... I'll check my last place. No, they did not send any more questions there. Alright. So, bye YouTube. See you in 2 weeks.